Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Emma Goodman with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. We are pleased to have Scott Becker, publisher of Becker's Healthcare, here to moderate today's question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email that you used to register. We are pleased to have three phenomenal speakers with us today. Adam Sherwood is an enterprise infrastructure architect with Covenant Health. We are also joined by John Reeves. John is a solutions development manager for data center analytics and security. We are also thrilled to have Andrew Bartley with us today. He is a senior solutions architect with the Health and Life Science Group at Intel Corporation. Andrew, I'll now turn the floor over to you to start today's webinar.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you everybody for joining today. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Andy Bartley. I'm a senior solutions architect with Intel Corporation in our Health and Life Sciences Group, and I get the pleasure really of working with healthcare organizations around the world on technology strategy and on challenges that they face, and working with our great partners like Lenovo on helping to get in and solve those challenges. And one interesting area that's been a topic of conversation more and more so lately in healthcare is the topic of VDI. So Emma, if you want to go ahead and jump forward 2 slides. Perfect. I am going to start off today's presentation by talking about a couple of the trends that we see driving this discussion around VDI. What are some things happening in healthcare? What are some things happening in the technology ecosystem that are bringing this back up? And then some use cases that we're seeing for VDI. And then I'll turn it over to John to dive into some of the updates to the technology and what a VDI solution looks like. So what's new with VDI? I like to start this conversation off by saying that VDI is not new to healthcare. And for those on the line today, if you've been in healthcare IT for a little while now, you may remember the initial introduction of VDI into healthcare a few years back, where it was really positioned kind of as a cure-all to many, many issues. And for a lot of organizations, their initial foray into VDI was not very successful. And there's a number of reasons for that. There's technology reasons. There's challenges that we found with the initial rollout of VDI around storage and I/O challenges when giving access to large numbers of users to virtualized infrastructure. There were challenges around scoping VDI projects and in some ways biting off more than you really could chew with an initial VDI implementation. And Adam at the end, Covenant, will share some great examples of how they've been successful with VDI by scoping out projects and really getting to understand user requirements. But all that to say that this is not a new concept, but a lot has changed since we first started talking about VDI in healthcare. And one of the things that's enabling this discussion today is that even though VDI wasn't widely adopted in the first round of viewing it, the model and method of deploying EMRs, as we've gone through the transition to digital workflows and adopting EMRs over the past few years, the predominant model of deploying those EMRs is as published applications, generally over some combination of Citrix and VMware architecture. So what was interesting is using this published application approach for EMRs built a lot of the skill set inside healthcare organizations to support VDI. So folks who are familiar with Citrix infrastructure and have Citrix engineers in-house are great partners to help with their Citrix deployments. The use of Citrix and VMware to deploy EMRs has forced a lot of organizations to look at network capabilities, to look at storage, to do a lot of the foundational network and architecture transformations required to deliver a great VDI experience. So we see a lot of those capabilities in-house today, and as this conversation around VDI resurges, I think folks are in a better position to take advantage of it this time around. In line with that adoption of electronic medical records, the new healthcare workflow requires access to patient data in a digital way on many different devices in many different places, and increasingly with a mobility component to that. And so how do I deliver a great consistent user experience and access to the clinical applications that the folks in my organization need to do their jobs in a consistent way across different devices that are stationary and mobile. And so we start to think about scaling out resources, more flexible resources to do that, and VDI starts to be one of the options that folks will take a look at. Now, with that move to mobility is an increasing number of devices at the edge, right? It might be tablets, it might be two-in-ones in people's hands as they go through their workflows. That increases the attack surface for my organization. And as we know, being in healthcare breaches are an increasing and growing issue. A number of issues around that. We see that healthcare information on the black market is about an order of magnitude more valuable than a simple credit card file, because of all that rich information and the multitude of ways that a bad actor can leverage that data to go out and pull money out of different healthcare systems. So really, healthcare will continue to be a target for these types of breaches. And thinking about standardizing and moving my data off the edge back into the data center is one technique that we're seeing organizations look at as a way to minimize that breach or attack surface. And finally, I'll just call out the last point that in this new world of value-based care, which is a lot of what we'll talk about today, managing risk and sharing risk across partner groups or across increasingly vertically integrated care delivery systems is a trend that we really see continuing. And so as a centralized healthcare IT group, how do I integrate small practices that we've acquired or that we're planning to roll out? How do I support community urgent care clinics? How do I spin up GPs and specialty clinics that are increasingly distributed geographically? And so enabling those satellite locations to spin up very quickly, to get access to clinical applications, be supported locally with minimal IT resources on site, VDI and Hyperconverge, which we'll talk about, is a way to help accomplish that business goal. So we can go ahead and flip to the next slide, please, Emma. Great, thank you. So a couple of use cases for VDI in healthcare before I turn it over to John. The first, I talked about the delivery of the electronic medical record, really the kind of the core of the new healthcare workflow. So how do I deliver that in a consistent and performant manner to all of my users, regardless of what my device policies might be? It may be an organization where I support BYOD. I may be an organization where I take more of an IT centrally managed approach to the clients and the endpoints in my organization. Regardless, I need to be able to support multiple application delivery models, both mobile and stationary, and do that in a consistent way. And in many cases, support that over increasingly large and complex network of locations and care continuum. And so thinking about how I do that and how I can add resources and scale out as I get more usage of the compute resources that I have, having things like attached storage to my infrastructure to reduce layers, reduce queuing, and improve user experience can help support that strategy at enterprise scale. Mobility, we've talked about supporting mobile devices, BYOD, common in some cases, not common in other, but being able to enable my health workers, my physicians to access that data when they've left the four walls of my inpatient setting and they go home. How can I enable that for more kind of continuing around the clock care? Consolidation we talked about, and security, very, very big issue right now. Can't talk enough about that. Plenty of webinars to go to just on security, but how do I protect that data? How do I minimize the attack surface at the edge and give more control over that important patient data? Bringing that back into the data center and supporting VDI is one way to do it. And finally, in this world of value-based care, IT more and more is being asked to be a strategic business partner to help with business change, to help deploy new business models. And so to do that, where are areas where I can streamline or optimize my current IT processes to free up cycles, to think more strategically and take on that business process transformation role? Using technology like Hyperconverged, where the optimizations are done before the infrastructure arrives, allows me to spin up those resources faster and frees up time to look at more strategic issues in the organization. So John and Adam will do a great job of diving into some of these in more detail, but just wanted to provide some initial context to some of the things that we see going on across the healthcare ecosystem at a high level. So I'll turn it over now to John Reeves from Lenovo Health.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. I appreciate it. Hi, my name is John Reeves, and I appreciate being able to share a few words on VDI and the ins and outs of a VDI solution and what it can do for you in your environment in the healthcare ecosystem. I work at Lenovo in a vertical solutions group called Lenovo Health, and I'm a solutions development manager, and I focus on strategy in the data center around end user computing, as well as how technology is used in healthcare today. And if you could move to the next slide, that'd be great. In following Andrew's lead, this is all about transforming the delivery of care. And as we already know from being in the business for a while now, VDI isn't new to healthcare, but we need to be able to meet organizations where they are from the technology levels at where they are today. And with so many different vendors and so many ways of accessing clinical systems, there is room for improvement as the market shifts and the technology changes, and we struggle to stay at least on par with the changing market dynamics and keeping up with the rates of reimbursement and the challenges that brings to the operations of healthcare. So on the clinician side, you know, we are moving from volume-based and reactive-based to proactive and value-based. And as well, we need to be able to be cognizant of the patient engagement side of the equation, where they are moving more from an awareness position to a wellness position. And being a caregiver today really requires being nimble and agile in its adaptation and its execution and management of health IT systems. So virtual desktop infrastructure, whether you focus on the actual back-end data center and infrastructure that delivers end user compute experience, or focusing on the app deployment desktop experience, really is permeating throughout the entire ecosystem. And we see VDI taking hold and advancing and having a need in almost every service line, right? So you have the application virtualization, which we all know and love, and that gets enhanced with tap and go workflows and other enhancements that make ease of use and consumption of digitization of health records a reality. You have efficiencies in medical imaging, vendor neutral archive access, enterprise content management. Our positioning with cloud is easier when we adopt technologies in VDI. And of course, business continuance and disaster recovery becomes a reality when we embrace the cloud and the technologies that make that a reality. Some of the technologies that are making VDI more cost effective today and making access to the clinical record more real time are the embrace of solid state disks and converged and hyper-converged technologies, integrated solutions, as we collapse the traditional stack of server, storage, network, and SAN into hyper-converged solutions that we'll further go into. We're able to take advantage of efficiencies of scale in the architectures and take advantage of chipsets and memory to further accelerate the clinical experience and time to decision making at the point of care. When you adopt virtual desktop technologies, there is a shift in the operations from the traditional distributed desktop management scenario into a more centralized order. And once you get over that, you're able to push more out to the edge, as Andrew said, and do more with less. Being able to take control of the end user computer environment to secure it for any number of reasons. And of course, in the security arena, there's plenty of cause for concern. You're able to control who has access to the protected information, and you're able to keep track of for reasons of compliance and auditability, when things are accessed as well. You're able also to provide a richer experience by adding components in a central location. If you need accelerators with GPUs for multimedia experiences, for less capable end devices, or for delivering to mobile clients, as well as having security and new thin clients for manageability concerns. Next slide. So we're leveraging virtual desktops because we're trying to really get ahead of the business challenges for healthcare, right? Market consolidation is driving mergers and acquisitions activity. We have budget pressures that are shrinking our rates of reimbursement and doing quite a bit with our capital budgets. We're having to take into account data growth, the concerns around bring your own device concerns, and the consumerization of healthcare, which is really putting pressure into the IT departments. The revenue shifts are daunting tasks, and we're having to really think seriously about what business we're in today in providing clinical care. As we move to value-based care and more of a shift to quality and outcomes, we're also having to think about how we manage these budgets. So if we're able to consolidate and leverage VDI infrastructure to its fullest and really harness and focus the business on delivering quality care and the service that we're here to give, it allows us to think more about our operational efficiencies and transition IT to be more strategic partner to the business and not so much a growing IT cost center within our clinical care settings. Next slide. Some of the things that hyperconvergence does is it collapses the IT stack and enables the technical vendors, such as Lenovo and Nutanix, for instance, with our hyperconverged platform, to really take advantage of unused capacity on the technical scale that would go otherwise unused in the aforementioned separate architecture of the old, where the server was separated from the storage or separated from the network and whatnot. We're able to capitalize on the enhancements of memory utilization and solid state drives and other proprietary architectures to boost those features that are important to accelerating the application experience at the endpoint. And in that, enabling us to enhance manageability and drive the costs down per user even lower. We're able to capitalize on unused capacity and boost the performance overall. We're able to achieve scalability and predictable building block models so that as you add users or demands to your environment, you can add in a building block fashion in a measured and predictable budget cycle way, technology to meet the business. And it allows you to compete with the pressures of having to federate your data center in ways, whether it's harnessing public cloud initiatives or hybrid cloud initiatives. You know, the movement toward private cloud as you collapse the data center with VDI and the end user experience by embracing bring your own device type thinking by design in this, it allows you greater flexibility in thinking about how you deliver care to your public patient population. So many of us now are coming to our providers with expectations of a consumer in other industry verticals, and the infrastructure needed to act like another retail front is pretty challenging if you don't embrace the new technologies that some of these Web 2.0 environments currently embrace. Next slide. When you move into a VDI solution, in hyperconvergence, what you're doing in effect is you're taking many of these standalone services or servers and you're collapsing them into a smaller footprint, and you're maximizing efficiencies in energy and utilization in terms of data center footprint. But again, as we consolidate to these workflows where you're unifying management consoles and taking advantage of resources, freeing them up to focus on clinical workflows, you're able to do more with less in effect. So what this diagram shows is that you're taking all of these functions and you're putting it into a more dense stack that's more integrated into your IT lifecycle. Next step, next slide. In value-based care, especially with this solution that we're going to be talking about here with Nutanix and Lenovo, security first design is of the utmost importance. And I wanted to just pause here and tell a little bit about what we do in particular with security, because there's so much in the news today about ransomware and hospitals being impacted by some security breach in one form or another. I know I read this morning there was another one in New York that was rather extensive. But maintaining security with traditional infrastructure environments is challenging for a number of reasons. With legacy infrastructure stacks, you have products from several vendors, each with a narrow, fragmented view of security. One example may be that the storage vendor thinks about just storage security, while virtualization vendor looks only at virtualization. A lot of the security issues we see today happen because of misconfigurations between products from different vendors, or oversights pertaining to default configurations. Validating and maintaining a security baseline, for example, through software upgrades is time-consuming and often involves error-prone manual processes that take away from innovation and productivity. So what we feel is security shouldn't be an afterthought or a big overhead for a healthcare entity to maintain. Nutanix and Lenovo take a comprehensive defense in-depth approach to security that covers the entire infrastructure lifecycle, from how the product is built to how it's deployed and managed. So when you look at hyperconverged infrastructure, you know, these are the types of things that this solution takes into account to alleviate the burden. We take a holistic approach to security, and we can cover three key pillars. Number one is the platform. With the security development lifecycle that this platform inherits, security is incorporated into a product development from the start. This avoids difficult trade-offs between security and performance or features. Strict tests for common vulnerabilities and exposures are built into the product. The QA processes and updates to handle known CVEs are scheduled for minor release cycles to minimize zero-day risks without slowing down product evolution. So this allows you to be cognizant and have this assuredness that with this type of solution, we have taken into account some of the known security gotchas and pitfalls. And in regards to automation, in this solution, Nutanix publishes custom security baseline documents called Security Technical Implementation Guides that cover the entire infrastructure stack and prescribe steps to secure deployment in the field. By implementing a security configuration management automation process, which checks over 800 security items that cover both storage and built-in virtualization, Nutanix automatically reports log inconsistencies and can revert them to baseline, and in effect, systems can self-heal. These are the types of new additive attributes that we're able to introduce in hyperconverged infrastructures, which is different than the traditional way of implementing VDI infrastructure. And in regards to the ecosystem in general, since no product is an island, we take a holistic approach to delivering a comprehensive security through a broad look at the partner ecosystem to meet the diverse security needs. This includes a network security, endpoint security, and data security ecosystem review. And we feel that our approach to security is comprehensive and truly differentiated in the industry. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide and just briefly talk about best practices when you look at virtual desktop implementation, and then we'll head into Adam's presentation. And he's going to talk more about this, but it's really important that as you assess technology and how it's used in your environment, that you really take a good look at its current state and how your mobile users and desktop users use technology today, and that you take the time to choose appropriate computing environments for the workflows. You should take a good look at understanding hyperconverged and what those economies of scale bring to your organization and the benefits, real and soft savings. Just because it's not showing up on a spreadsheet doesn't mean necessarily that it isn't going to make itself evident as an advantage to your environment. And always pilot to prove a technology. If you have a current implementation of VDI, a lot of these can be stood up alongside in a pilot to prove its efficacy in your environment. And also engage third parties and leverage professionals to really test and validate your return on investment and to implement best practices. So thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Adam.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Sherwood, an enterprise architect at Covenant Health. Next slide, please. I have been at Covenant Health for about 6 or 7 months. We are a New England-based healthcare organization of about 5,000 employees, 3 hospitals, and about 40 ambulatory and specialty care facilities. I joined Covenant Health as an enterprise architect last year, as I said. For the 15 years before that, I was at another regional healthcare org. I had roles such as architect, manager, developer. That org was a bit bigger, had 9 hospitals and 10,000 employees. I mentioned that because I've worked on the design and rollout of VDI on hyperconverged infrastructure at both organizations. And my current deployment is in a pilot stage now, so some of the measurements and results are actually from my previous implementation. Next slide. Thank you. Current VDI initiative is sized for about 4,000 sessions using Citrix Zen Desktop on Lenovo HX HCI. That infrastructure is distributed across 3 hospitals, and we're piloting now in 2 to 3 departments at each hospital. My previous VDI build used XenApp and Zen Desktop on Nutanix NX HCI, sized for 5,000 sessions. That previous deployment was used exclusively in inpatient clinical areas. Our scope is quite a bit broader currently at Covenant Health, where we mean to take over the world and cover clinical areas, business areas, everything. Next slide, please. Now, the reasons for both of the VDI initiatives that I'm talking about were similar, and I'll talk about the 4 main drivers being cost, security, manageability, and modernization. And you'll hear a lot of similarities in what I say here with what you've heard from John just a moment ago about why one would do VDI on hyperconverged. So first, cost. A lot of the other drivers relate back to cost and about reducing expenses. Taken on its own, 2 things about cost. 1, we set out to reduce PC capital expense by converting to thin clients, with the idea being that instead of having a 3 to 5 year PC refresh cycle, we extend the lifetime of the hardware, and you end up doing a refresh cycle that's longer, maybe 5, maybe 7, in some cases, maybe 10 years. I'm careful about throwing around 10 years. I think 5 to 7 is very reasonable. And so in the end, not only is the hardware that you're buying lower cost per unit, but it lasts longer. And you can look at that as a cost avoidance in projected capital spend. Now, the other thing is with VDI and thin clients, we see fewer hardware break fix calls. So there's less of a need for at the elbow IT support. Now that reduces IT operational expense, particularly when it comes to that end user support. So we're covering CapEx and OpEx. Having fewer support calls means that we also see higher IT staff efficiency and higher user satisfaction and productivity. Next, security. And John and Andy talked about this, I think, very well, but it's an obvious one, but it's such an important one, it's worth mentioning. By taking the conventional desktop away and taking the desktop and the data and the applications off the desk and moving them to the data center, we increase control over data. We reduce the attack surface and we simplify security, auditing, and protection. Another benefit is that every PC that gets converted to a thin client reduces the number of PCs to cover with certain types of licensing, like endpoint encryption. And I pick on endpoint encryption in particular because it's important. Certainly we need to do it, but it's also complex and costly. And with no data on thin clients, we don't encrypt them, and that's a savings. Now, manageability is key to all my areas of work. I need to recommend and design solutions that allow a fixed number of IT staff to deliver faster performance and higher stability. That includes operational management, capacity planning, incident identification and resolution, and end user support. With VDI, we meet that need by implementing on modern hyperconverged infrastructure, choosing a single manufacturer for thin clients that we can manage, update, and remote control with a single pane of glass, and by doing app delivery with Citrix Zenith. Now, finally, my favorite point of all these, and if anyone asks, I'll say that I said cost was my favorite, but really it's modernization. Healthcare IT is an interesting paradox. We're always striving for innovation and modern approaches to care delivery, but we're often bound to legacy technologies and frequently playing catch up. Now, the necessity to modernize can drive VDI. In our case, we're working towards an implementation of Epic EHR this fall, and our existing client tech does not meet Epic requirements. Now, we could have considered a conventional replacement wherever we found hardware that was too old, displays that were too small, or operating systems that were out of support. And that might have gotten the job done, but that would have set us up to need to do another hardware replacement in 3 to 5 years, and so on. Instead, VDI and thin clients offered us a way to meet workstation requirements for Epic, to modernize, to have more flexible application delivery and user support mechanisms, and to get out of that 3 to 5 year hardware replacement cycle. Next slide, please. Measurable results. So from my previous implementation, and I emphasize this was my previous org, Covenant Health is headed straight to this path of success. We are still today in pilot. The initial feedback and results from the pilots are promising, highly promising. But I want to give some measured results from a production deployment. So I go back in time about a year, and I'll call out 2 or 3 measured points. One is what I mentioned a moment ago about cost avoidance on PC capital spend. And for the budget we had at the time and the volume of devices we were talking about, we cut the commitment for capital expenditure of PCs by $800,000 a year. And that's cost avoidance. Now, that happened due to the devices having a lower unit cost than clients versus PCs. It also, though, allowed us, we also, though, achieved that by getting a longer lifetime out of existing PCs rather than replacing them, repurposing them. And many of the thin client makers also have a repurposing solution where you can run the thin client operating system as an OS on existing commodity hardware and still manage those devices as if they were thin clients. And those 2 factors contribute to that cost savings. Now, the next one, the one that I just sometimes can't even believe, but it's true. I went back to the data and really grilled the people who gave me this data because it seemed, it was really what we were hoping for. It was a best case. And it was an increase of efficiency and productivity for clinicians, for providers. And at the largest hospital where we rolled out VDI, we found doctors and nurses increased productivity by 20%, mostly due to faster logins, faster application launches, and the ability to reconnect to a disconnected session. So it's very simple. We just reduced the number of times that they had to log in per shift and made each login faster. That may not sound like much, but if you think about the number of times in a shift that a doctor or nurse in an inpatient setting has to log in. Even a few seconds conserved per login adds up. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a change of pace here. This is an overview of our geographic distribution. And I think this is important to talk about. John and I have talked about this, and he encouraged me to do this. I think he's right on. It's important to emphasize that of the many challenges one could face anytime you do an IT initiative, particularly VDI, geographic distribution of your client sites, your data centers, can be a huge challenge, and it's an inflexible challenge. You can't just make the geography go away. So you've got to be able to deal with that. This map shows a little glimpse into what our state of geographic distribution is. I say we're a New England-based healthcare org. We're based, our HQ is in Tewksbury, Mass, and we love it. We're proud of that. But you see, we span from about the middle of the state of Maine, the great state of Maine, where I sit. The teal pins are our hospitals. The green pin is our corporate HQ. The red pins are a small subset of our practices, which you see span from Maine to Massachusetts to Pennsylvania. And the purple pin in the bottom left over Richmond, Virginia, is where the healthcare org with whom we partner to provide our Epic infrastructure sits. And so that's that's a big geographic area and distribution to manage network connectivity, resilience and availability of IT services, and quality of service. It's non-trivial, but I show this map in part to show that it is possible. It is possible to have challenges like this and still provide success. Next slide, please. So lessons learned. I have a lot to say here. I could go on much more than just the few points that I have here. I've been involved with and been at the helm of more than one successful VDI implementation, and either John or Andy you called us back to when VDI in healthcare was new. I did it then too, and sometimes it was successful and sometimes it wasn't. So I've learned what to do and what not to do. I have just a tiny subset of lessons to share here. The first, if I could only say one thing, it would be get help. Do not do it yourself. You know what you can and can't do yourself. But the reason I say get help is, and especially from a partner who specializes in VDI, is that once you've done the infrastructure, and the infrastructure is so important, you must get that right. What's in the data center, and whether that's hyperconverged, which I think is the way to go, or not, you've got to get that foundation right. But once you do that, let's say you can deliver a Windows desktop. That's a great accomplishment, but that doesn't actually give you value, and that's really not that's not success. And what you've got to really do, which I think is much more challenging for infrastructure people, and this is why it's good to have a partner, is you've got to deal with delivering the user-focused, device-agnostic application experience in a way that's meaningful for the user. And to do that, you've got to do application inventory, deal with strategies for app delivery. You've got to do performance monitoring and optimization so that you're actually getting the performance you need. All the way down to change management and communication, things that we cannot take for granted. Your chances of having any success, much more so on time and within sight of the budget, are so much better with a partner that has done VDI before. Next, I'd say obsess about the apps and the workflows. Like I said, you must get the infrastructure right. But if you deliver the desktop, you've delivered the dial tone. You can't get anywhere without that, but that's not the whole job. Users need apps. You've got to understand the apps, the workflows, the data, and how people, apps, and data interact. And you've got to meet those requirements and deliver workflows while transforming to a modern desktop and application delivery paradigm. That doesn't just happen. And again, doing the all-important infrastructure doesn't get you that. there's more to it. So we're proud of the infrastructure we've built and the services we can provide on it. And I think we should be. It's pretty great. But around here, the mantra is still, it's all about the apps. Next, agonize over the endpoint devices. Nobody, I wouldn't expect anyone to agree that this is an important, flashy topic to talk about, but boy, if you don't get the thin clients right or the endpoint device right, you're not going to hit success. And it's easy to consider thin clients to be a commodity, but kind of unlike PCs, which are very generalized, there's such a variation across manufacturers and models in terms of client devices. Things that actually really matter, even if they don't sound very exciting, like number of ports, ease of management, hardware build quality, and more. We've chosen to standardize on one manufacturer so that there would be one management interface, and to make sure that that vendor also provides a repurposing solution so that, as I mentioned before, we can manage that maker's hardware and commodity PC hardware under the same tool. Now, whatever you choose, please get serious about your requirements and take the time to thoroughly evaluate the solutions you're considering. Get eval units on hand, try them out with your solution, connect all the peripherals. It is not uncommon to connect up the barcode reader, e-cig pad, keyboard, mouse, webcam, and the handy light so that the nurse can see the keyboard, and find out that you're running out of power. And so these things have to be considered. I personally, in my experience, have decided that every thin client should come with a separate USB powered hub. We actually bundle that with our purchases. And lastly, do what I like to call guerrilla modernization, which means to take advantage of the opportunities along the way that VDI affords you to do IT better. Maybe you have to be a little sneaky about it, and that's okay. It goes both ways. A need to modernize can drive VDI, but if you do VDI right, you'll find opportunities to modernize that you might not have even expected. Take the app virtualization and layering and profile management solutions that you implemented for VDI and use them on PCs too. Application upgrades will be faster and safer, and then you'll stay up to date so you're more secure with less work for IT. Do BYOD. I firmly believe that if you do VDI right, one way to define that, as I define it, is to deliver desktops and apps in a user-focused, device-agnostic way. If you add remote access to that, well, that's BYOD. And if you do that, you've increased user satisfaction through device choice, you've provided mobile access to apps and information, and further reduced the PC count for IT to support. Use VDI for mergers and acquisitions. Don't re-image or replace existing PCs that you just became the proud owner of. Instead, replace them with thin clients or repurpose them with a thin client OS. Get that onboarding done simpler, faster, more repeatably, and with less upfront cost. And I didn't mention SSO. John and Andy did. One of the keys, I think, to those faster logon times and session reconnects is not only SSO, but what you might call tap and go. So tapping an RFID badge on a prox reader, biometric readers, what have you. Find those opportunities to modernize, and one of them is, if you can, maybe take away from the users the burden to enter, hand type their credentials every time. That's the end for me. Next slide, please, Emma, and I'll turn it over to Scott Becker for the Q&A. Thank you.
Adam, thank you very much. John, Andy, Adam, thank you all for working with us on a complicated but important and big topic. Let me start with a question. We've got a number of questions from the audience and a couple of questions that I've got. The first question I've got, and I think this might be either an Adam or a John question, is if you've already got a virtual desktop situation in place, but needs improvement, what's the next step in sort of evaluating that? And just to give me some background, how many places already have some sort of VDI solution in place? Does everybody have some sort of solution in place, but just not well developed yet, or is it all over the board? And John, maybe you could take a shot at those questions.
I want to let Adam follow up, but let me take a shot. I think there's a lot of change in the market. There's a lot of shift in the business from on-premise management of IT services to off-premise or remotely hosted. And that's changing the landscape quite a bit and making things somewhat unpredictable since the economies of scale for customers to implement more expert infrastructure systems are becoming more in reach, right? With some of these converged, hyperconverged technologies, and the fact that these technologies are becoming more integrated with management consoles and an entire IT lifecycle paradigm is becoming easier to implement. At the same time, the movement to wanting to operationalize the expenses and focus on the business is really making this more acceptable to have done outside your organization, right? As people become more competent with public clouds and connectivity issues are getting cleared up, depending on where you are geographically. So these are the things that are causing a lot of disruption with on-premise versus off-premise and differences in an uneven landscape. But where you are, so I may go to the next generation EMR and then have that completely remotely hosted. Whereas before, the first generation EMR, I did it all myself in-house, right? So
and how quickly is it? How quickly is it moving towards, in big systems, to really cloud-driven stuff versus stuff that's server on hand? And then the next question, John, I had for you. Let me ask you a follow-up question with that. The amount of desktops used in systems, in hospital systems, in their administrative offices across the landscape, what's the projection on that now versus 5 years from now? And that might be an Adam question as well as you, John. But first is big servers versus cloud in big healthcare systems. And then second is the fate of the long-term desktop in the system.
So I don't have the type of IDC data handy to give you the numbers, but there is this kind of anecdotal information. You can see it most clearly in some of the largest IDNs where they had these, like Partners or something, where they had some of these larger homegrown or centrally managed in-house systems, right, for the longest times with their longitudinal care records, and then they moved to a commercially viable off-the-shelf product, right? And then those systems like Epic or Cerner are now offering, or Siemens, right, are offering more remotely hosted or on-premise managed systems, right? So that is now offloaded, right? And in that comes the need for this type of implementation in mass, so that systems are centrally managed, that they can have this geographic disparity, managed in the course of business without any hiccups. Like Adam showed with his map, his geographic spread is quite significant in that he has a third-party data center providing, a core clinical system, which is in Virginia, for instance, right? You're seeing more of that as the ACOs get momentum and as mergers and acquisitions become more real and the systems become more vertically integrated, and you consume more of the content of the care continuum with one system, the payers becoming providers and the providers becoming payers, so to speak, and being more vertically integrated. You have to control the ecosystem.
Let me ask you a follow-up question I've got from one of the audience members. It's how does a solution, this sort of Lenovo solution that you're working on and developing, different than sort of a Citrix or Dell solution?
So in particular to Lenovo, we have a particular pedigree of engineering that we inherited from the x86 business from IBM, right? So the Lenovo data center assets come from, get a real good start from when Lenovo purchased that server business from IBM. And we can bring to it, the fact that we have 160 countries, we're a $47 billion company. We've got this supply chain and this infrastructure of people and technical support and world-class customer satisfaction and reliability to back it up. You know, when we talk about vertically integrated solutions, we do the reference architectures and the testing of the software in with the hardware, so that when we provide engineered solutions, these things have, you know, uptime and availability backed by SLAs. And so, you know, it's not just piecing together parts, you know, like the first generation server storage, you know, network SAN stacks. As we move to integrated systems and hyperconverged systems, you know, at least at Lenovo, when we partner with someone like Nutanix and we listen to our customers, like Adam is talking about at Covenant, you know, we really are looking to be driven, you know, by the vertical use case, right? And to make sure that there's that response time and, you know, answering the call of the business, right? But Adam, can you talk a little bit to standing up, you know, VDI and what you see in the desktop business, and because what I see is this migration, right, to how people are consuming the services, right, at the end point.
That would be great, Adam. Yeah, if you could talk a little bit about sort of, you had mentioned cutting PC costs by $800,000 one year and stuff like that. And I think that's fascinating because we've all lived with the PC. I'm looking at one right now as I'm listening to the presentation. And what's the fate of that in the system, and how is that replaced?
Sure. I can speak to my strategy for my organization, and it's going to sound, or it may sound a little wacky. I think it's a key to our future success, though. And in a nutshell, it is, to the degree that it can, let IT, let healthcare IT get at least a little bit out of the business of supporting the PC. And this goes back to my mention of BYOD. It's all tied together, and it's all sort of part of the plan, even if it's not obvious up front. We say we're doing VDI. We add remote access to that, and now we've done BYOD. And in what way do I mean that? I mean, we have so many users, particularly doctors.
How hard is it to support everybody's different type of device?
Exactly.
Versus one type of desktop? How hard is that?
Exactly.
Or does it become easier and easier?
It's easier. It is easier if you do it in a certain key way. And not that this is the only way, but by meeting user demand for the device they want, the interaction, the experience they want, we set our level of responsibility at delivering the apps, the data, delivering the desktop, not the hardware desktop, to that device. And let's take just a Citrix use case. At the end of the day, as long as you bring to the table a device where you can get internet connectivity, and can run Citrix receiver, which is, you know, a heck of a lot of devices and operating systems, that's really all we need. We can deliver what we need to you. And the responsibility for the hardware, we punt that to you, the user. Now, maybe we give you a stipend, maybe we defray the cost, maybe we give you a menu of options to choose from. But one approach, not the only one, is the user owns that device and bears the responsibility for it. And they are required, we encourage or require them to carry manufacturer warranty and support, so Apple Care, if you will. And we lessen our direct responsibility.
And let me ask a different question to just bring some of Andy's thoughts into the discussion. Andy, you're a senior solutions person at Intel. How does Intel work with Lenovo or systems on these types of projects and situations?
Yeah, so we come at it from a little bit of a different standpoint, being fairly, agnostic from a technology perspective, right? I mean, Intel, at the end of the day, when it comes to these solutions, is an ingredient provider. But where we get a lot of value is, working with partners like Lenovo to really understand the needs of the market and of their customers. And, Intel at any given time has, a real diversity of different projects going on to optimize technology, to update the technology, to include new features and capabilities like hardware enhanced encryption for security, like new processor generation. So we'll work with those partners to help them understand the new technologies that Intel is coming out with, and then land those inside of specific business use cases. So, VDI being one of those, and for the reasons that we've talked about earlier. But, how can you take advantage of some of the new innovations that Intel's coming out with as a way to improve the performance, improve scalability, improve the security posture, and really think holistically about that? Because a lot of times there's goodness baked into the new technology that folks either may not know about or may not know how to take advantage. And we really work to enable that as part of the overall solution.
And let me ask a different question for John, because John, at one time, Lenovo, going back a generation, or not even a generation, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, was more of a desktop company at one time, and sort of probably a common misperception from a layperson. How does a Lenovo look at this as the world evolves and you've evolved with it? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the big pushes to get the data center assets into the Lenovo catalog was their acquisition of the IBM x86 business, right, from IBM. So that really propelled them a few years ago into the data center. To follow on to Andrew's point about how Intel works with the technology providers, I'll give you an example and that'll help answer the question. When Intel gives guidance to architectures with their chipsets and their best practices to take advantage of the new and upcoming technologies to the technology providers such as Lenovo, it's up to us to then make the useful component market ready, right? So for instance, one example will be Intel will come out with a technology to do better encryption with fingerprint acquisition with a fingerprint reader, right? So on a desktop or a mobile device, you'll have a fingerprint reader, and they'll have a better and secure way to acquire a fingerprint and keep that encrypted on a chip, right? And then they'll encourage the designers, the technology designers, to then make that into what's appropriate for their marketplace. So we'll take that and we'll add that technology in a ThinkPad or a mobile device, taking advantage of the best and the greatest technology and the securest. On the back end,
you guys work very closely together.
Very, very closely together. And we even recently have, shared management. So we're even getting that pedigree, into Lenovo in our data center group to help propel us even further into the future by capitalizing not just on the close partnership of technology, but also in management best practices to help us stay ahead of the curve.
Gotcha. So then you see more and more things in practice, like we see as consumers, but actually at hospitals and health systems, in terms of fingerprint access, other kinds of access, to sort of cut down the time wasted on all kinds of other trying to access your actual what you have to access as a provider.
Yeah, they'll have enhancements for visualization needs, right? So where multimedia experience and imaging, for instance, in healthcare, or quantitative necessities in regards to managing big data, and how do we do artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. All these things impact value-based care and the business of medicine. So in having all of this as a framework in your roadmap to further enhance allows us to better meet the needs of the marketplace going forward. So as you consolidate things, like end user compute, and you consolidate things in the data center, you can now add new services and provide those.
Let me ask you another question, which I know for people in the budget area or CIOs running huge budgets. I mean, one of the things that Adam mentioned was, there used to be, if there were 2,000 people in the IT department in total, there were 400 of those doing desktop service, constantly servicing, or 15% of that workforce was helping people at the workplace. A different thing that arose over the last decade was monumental costs spent on putting in EMRs. And you see some big systems reporting challenges with results based on EMRs. Is there any way to do some of this VDI work in an incremental way without it being as costly as the EMR types of conversions that people did? Is there ways to do this in pieces, in pilots, where you're not killing the budgets of systems?
Yes, so I think as these converged infrastructures and these integrated systems are becoming more mainstream, right now we're in this transition. The costs and being able to consume this operationally, like on a subscription basis, because these services are amortized, if you will, over multiple years per user. That helps in the cost model to consuming this, and then you basically just turn on using more of this over time and transition as these older capital assets become end of life, or these systems become no longer useful. There's this thinking, right, that the old way really straddles you with too much technical debt, right? And so what you need to do is change to converge into these new technologies so that you are now changing the cost benefit so that you are using more of your dollar on new technologies and innovation, and having to spend less of that on operational, right? This 60-70% spent on operations. You got to flip that, and the way you flip that so that you have more of the dollar spent on innovation and new business is that you move towards some of this new OpEx internal subscription type thinking. So as Adam highlighted, if he can shift some of this, it's not so much burden, because it's the consumerization that we have to be cognizant of, that people are consuming this anyway with their own devices. So why not free up those resources to be more clinically focused, have those resources focus on clinical service desk or other things in the business, and not be an IT service company within your organization.
Let me ask a couple follow-up questions. I've got a couple great questions from the audience that came in recently. Hyperconverged storage platform. Is that a standalone to just support the VDI solution? No. Actually, it's a think of it as a workload platform. It happens to be converged storage and compute, right? In that it eliminates mostly the independent standalone server and storage components and the supporting networking systems. And you do buy it does offer predictable purchasing, right? So that you have a certain amount of expectation now as you add capacity with compute and storage alongside. But it's not just for VDI, right? In this solution you can add GPUs for to accelerate certain business functions. If you have a high use for say you have some artificial intelligence workload, or you have some high graphics workloads, you can add these graphics NVIDIA cards, for instance, right, to accelerate certain types of needed services at the hardware level that then accelerate at the endpoint and doesn't require that endpoint to be as beefy, right? So you can add the capacity for those different workloads. It's not just virtual desktop, it's also for things like database and reporting. There's lots of certifications happening with the ISVs today, like with InterSystems, and Cerner. All these folks are really looking into these new software-defined storage platforms and hyperconverged platforms, because it's no longer just a box, right? They're integrated systems. People are looking for economies of scale, and the use cases are wide and varied. Let me do this, John, Adam, Andy. We're over by a couple minutes. I just want to let our audience know, if it's okay, John, Adam, Andy, we'll keep going for a few more minutes. I've got just a couple more questions I'd love to ask the three of you, a couple from the audience, if you've got just a minute or two more.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
This is Adam.
Okay.
I do.
Good. And let me ask you a question on patient experience. Any quantification or metrics on how VDI impacts patient experience? Anything quick that you could tell the audience about improving clinical functions?
Sure. And I'm sorry to say we did not measure any direct metrics by surveying patients. I will say that the main metrics we did gather went to improved productivity for clinicians by enabling them to spend less time on the minutia of logging in and dealing with app launches. One assumes, and I think this is a good assumption, time that you give back to clinicians, you have an opportunity to support the clinician in giving some of that time to patients as face-to-face time, or time spent doing their very important jobs instead of waiting on an IT device.
You know, and part of this is intuitive. I think as all of us see it in our real lives, how much you get access out to people with their mobile so they can actually do work, or you see it in your doctor's office today more and more. Another question, and John, I'm not sure if this is an appropriate question, but I'm going to ask, and you'll tell me if, people are licensing different VDI types of software and licenses for it from different providers. Anything that people should be aware of in doing so? This question was asked specifically about a different company's licensing, but generally, are there things that people should be thinking about in signing a license on VDI type assets?
I think the technology providers are software agnostic, so to speak, right? So this solution doesn't necessarily predicate one using one over the other. There are definite differences in the license positions of the companies, of the predominant countries. I know, the hypervisors differ greatly. Some people call it, there's a hypervisor tax depending on who you choose. Citrix has different licensing in the channel versus, how you acquire it with the enterprise, and same with VMware and whatnot. So, it's up to one's own relationship and how they consume the licenses. I don't think it's something that I can speak to generally, other than results will vary, right? Mileage varies with your relationship.
Gotcha, but sort of got to make sure it's, nothing else, have to be evaluated very carefully to understand front-end cost, ongoing cost, ease of switching over time.
You do. And Adam will tell you, and even my own experience in healthcare, it wasn't just a game of vendor pinball with a spreadsheet, right? If you just did by the numbers, certain other solutions may be cheaper, but you have to look at where you're trying to get to and where you're actually saving money. So, there's economies of scale at every level, and some hard costs, make themselves evident. And then there's some unrealized or soft costs, that are just as important. And Adam, has some examples of that he spoke to in the past. And you can't just be too spreadsheet driven when you're looking at the numbers, because you have to think about where you're going.
Well, and people have gotten stuck with that problem with legacy systems, where they invest in a cheaper legacy system but didn't scale well with them, and even wasn't also updated as constantly as some of the big name pedigree systems like Lenovo, Intel driven, et cetera. So you see some of that all throughout healthcare. I know that we're at about 10 minutes after 2, and we're going to start losing some more of our audience. So let me wrap up now. I want to do this. I want to thank Andy Bartley from Intel, John Reeves from Lenovo, and of course Adam Sherwood, who's from the provider from Covenant Health. Just really helpful and so forth. We'll try and get this the slides out to everybody that listened in and everybody that signed up, because a lot of people that signed up, some weren't able to make it to the actual webinar. We'll get the slides out to everybody, and then we'll also post this so people can hear this more. But just from our perspective, just a pleasure to have such bright people from Intel, Lenovo, and Adam from Covenant on the phone. So thank you, folks, very, very much, and we'll look forward to visiting with you shortly. Thank you.